My name is Rebecca Collins, 32, standing in the pouring rain outside my childhood home. My sister Natalie changed the locks. "You have no right to be here," she said coldly. The eviction notice from her lawyer claimed the house was solely hers. How could the sister I raised after our parents died now treat me like a stranger? I sacrificed my education, my future, everything for her. As water soaked through my clothes, I made a silent promise. This betrayal would not be the end of our story. I still remember the disbelief washing over me that day. If you've ever experienced family betrayal, you know that hollow feeling in your chest. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and if you've faced something similar. Hit subscribe if you want to find out how I fought back against my sister's shocking betrayal, and leave a like if you believe family karma eventually comes full circle. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in rural Massachusetts, Natalie and I shared the kind of sisterly bond that seemed unbreakable. Our modest two-story colonial home on Maple Street had been in the family for generations, filled with memories of holiday gatherings and summer barbecues. 8 years my junior, Natalie had always looked up to me with wide, admiring eyes. I was the responsible one, the planner, while she was creative and spontaneous. Despite our differences, we balanced each other perfectly. Everything changed on a rainy October night when I was 19 and Natalie was just 14. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. I remember staring at the glowing red numbers on my dorm room alarm clock before answering. The police officer's voice was gentle but direct. Our parents' car had hydroplaned on the wet highway, crashing into a guardrail. They died on impact. In that moment, my carefully planned future shattered. I was in my sophomore year at Boston University with a full scholarship in business administration. My dreams had been so clear: graduate, land a job at a prestigious firm, eventually start my own company. But as I sat in the funeral home 3 days later, watching Natalie sob uncontrollably in her black dress that was slightly too big for her slender frame, I knew what I had to do. "I'll defer for a semester," I told my academic advisor the following week. "Take all the time you need," she said, squeezing my hand. "Your scholarship will be waiting." But one semester turned into two, and eventually, I had to make the call. I couldn't leave Natalie. Our only living relative was Aunt Meredith, who lived in Arizona and was battling her own health issues. The thought of Natalie entering the foster system or being uprooted across the country was unthinkable. So I dropped out. The university was understanding, promising my scholarship would be reinstated whenever I returned. I never did. The following years were a blur of exhaustion and responsibility. Our parents had left some life insurance money, but much of it went toward the remainder of the mortgage and maintaining the aging house. I worked as a waitress at Rosie's Diner during the day and took night shifts at the local packaging factory whenever I could. My hands would crack and bleed in the winter from the constant washing of dishes and exposure to cardboard. Through it all, I made sure Natalie had everything she needed. I attended every parent-teacher conference, helped with homework, and stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays. I wanted desperately for her to have a normal teenage experience despite our loss. It wasn't always easy. Natalie went through a rebellious phase at 16, staying out past curfew and hanging out with kids I didn't trust. We had screaming matches that left both of us in tears. "You're not my mother," she shouted during one particularly heated argument. "No, I'm not," I responded, my voice breaking. "But I'm all you've got, and I'm doing my best." That night, I found her curled up in my bed around midnight, her eyes puffy from crying. "I'm sorry, Becca," she whispered. "I know you gave up everything for me." Those moments of connection made all the sacrifices worthwhile. My own social life had dwindled to nearly nothing. Dating was complicated. How do you explain to potential partners that you're essentially a parent in your early 20s? My few remaining friends from high school gradually stopped calling as our lives diverged. While they were graduating college and starting careers, I was attending Natalie's softball games and working double shifts. When Natalie was accepted to the University of Massachusetts with a partial scholarship, I couldn't have been prouder. We sat at our kitchen table, the acceptance letter between us, and I reached for her hand. Mom and Dad would be so proud of you, I said. They'd be proud of both of us, Natalie replied, squeezing my fingers. This is because of you, Becca. I wouldn't be here without you. We never formally discussed the ownership of the house. In my mind, it belonged to both of us equally, though I handled all the bills and maintenance. The mortgage was finally paid off using the last of the insurance money when Natalie started college, which eased our financial burden somewhat. Still, I continued working multiple jobs to cover property taxes and utilities while also helping with Natalie's remaining tuition costs. It was during Natalie's junior year that she met Kenneth Preston. She brought him home for Thanksgiving. A tall, well-dressed business major with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch. He came from money. That much was obvious from his cashmere sweater and the brand-new Audi he parked in our driveway. It's a pleasure to meet you, Rebecca, he said, offering a firm handshake. Natalie talks about you constantly. What you've done for her is remarkable. I warmed to him initially, appreciating how he looked at my sister with genuine affection. But there were moments that gave me pause. When I served the turkey, slightly overcooked after my double shift at the diner, he made a comment about his mother's personal chef. When Natalie mentioned my plan to eventually return to college, he asked, "At your age," with subtle condescension. Still, Natalie seemed happy, and that was what mattered most to me. If I noticed how she started to adopt his mannerisms, his opinions, his view of the world, I told myself it was normal. If I felt a pang when she began spending holidays with his family in their Cape Cod vacation home instead of with me, I suppressed it. Kenneth says I need to start networking with the right people, she explained when she called to say she wouldn't be home for Christmas, our first apart since our parents died. His father knows the dean of Harvard Law School. Of course, I said, swallowing my disappointment. That makes sense. I spent that Christmas working a double shift at the diner and fell asleep on the couch watching It's a Wonderful Life alone, trying not to feel the emptiness of the house. For years passed after Natalie graduated from law school. The sister who once shared everything with me had become increasingly distant, transformed by Kenneth's influence and her new professional identity. Her wardrobe of comfy sweaters and jeans had been replaced with tailored suits and designer shoes. Her once wild curly hair was now straightened and cut into a severe bob that Kenneth said looked more professional. The first time I noticed something was wrong was when Natalie referred to our family home as my house during a phone call with one of her new colleagues from the prestigious Boston law firm where she'd landed a position immediately after passing the bar. Yes, I'll host the partners' dinner at my house next month, she said, pacing the living room while I washed dishes. She caught my questioning look and quickly amended, our house, I mean. But the slip happened again and again. Meanwhile, Kenneth's presence in our home increased, along with his opinions about everything from the outdated kitchen cabinets to the inefficient heating system. You really should consider a complete renovation, he told Natalie one evening while I sat quietly at the dinner table I had refinished myself years ago. This place is good bones, but it's stuck in the last century. The house is character, I defended gently. And renovations are expensive. Sometimes you have to spend money to add value, Kenneth replied with a dismissive wave. Natalie deserves to live somewhere that reflects her success. I bit my tongue, remembering how I'd painted every room in this house myself, how I'd learned to fix the plumbing when we couldn't afford a professional, how every scratch and dent held a memory of our family. When Kenneth proposed to Natalie after 2 years of dating, the engagement ring was ostentatious, a diamond so large it looked uncomfortable on my sister's slender finger. The wedding plans quickly spiraled into an extravagant affair at a historic mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. Kenneth's parents are covering most of it, Natalie assured me when I expressed concern about the cost. But I'd like to contribute to the flower arrangements. It's only $5,000. I winced at the figure but nodded. I'd been saving for years to return to school, but Natalie's happiness came first. It always had. I picked up extra shifts and dipped into my modest savings to help with not just the flowers, but also her designer dress when Kenneth's mother deemed her original choice too simple. The wedding day itself was beautiful, but alienating. I found myself relegated to the background despite being the maid of honor. Kenneth's mother took charge, positioning her family prominently in photos while I was often asked to step aside. During the reception, Natalie spent mere minutes at my table, surrounded by her new law school friends and Kenneth's business associates. "You look beautiful," I told her during one brief moment together. "Thanks for everything, Becca," she said, squeezing my hand before being whisked away by Kenneth's father for another introduction to someone important. The honeymoon was initially planned as a 2-week tour of the Greek islands. 2 days before they were set to return, I received a brief text, extending trip for another month. Kenneth surprised me. "Can you keep handling the house stuff?" I continued maintaining our home, paying all the bills from my waitressing job while also covering the property taxes that came due during their absence. When they finally returned 6 weeks later, Natalie barely unpacked before returning to her demanding job at the firm. One afternoon, while Natalie was at work and Kenneth was at a business lunch, I was cleaning their room, something I still did despite working full-time myself. As I dusted Natalie's desk, a legal document slipped from a folder. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except that I saw our address printed at the top. Curiosity and concern prompted me to look closer. It was a consultation summary from a property attorney, outlining options for clarifying sole ownership of our family home. My hands trembled as I read further. The document referenced removing long-term residents without ownership claims and strategies to minimize legal exposure. When Natalie returned that evening, I confronted her, the document in hand. "What is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She snatched it from me, her face flushing. "You went through my things?" "I was cleaning and it fell out." "Natalie, are you trying to force me out of her home?" "Don't be dramatic," she said, tucking the paper into her briefcase. "It's just a consultation. I'm a lawyer now. I'm exploring all our options for the future." "Options for what?" "This is our house. Both of ours." "Is it?" she countered, her voice taking on the crisp, professional tone she used with clients. "Your name isn't on the deed, Rebecca. I've been looking into it. Because I was 19 when our parents died. We were focused on survival, not paperwork. But you know they would have wanted it for both of us." Kenneth walked in then, placing a proprietary hand on Natalie's shoulder. "Everything okay here?" "Just a misunderstanding," Natalie said quickly. "Rebecca thinks I'm trying to kick her out or something ridiculous." "That's absurd," Kenneth laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Family is family. Later that night, I heard them whispering in their bedroom, Kenneth's voice low and insistent. When I passed Natalie in the hallway the next morning, she assured me I was overreacting. "You're being paranoid, Becca. I would never do that to you. You're my sister." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. So I pushed down my concerns and convinced myself I had misinterpreted the document, that Natalie would never betray me after all we'd been through together. But in the following weeks, I noticed small changes. Kenneth began referring to future renovation plans with "when it's just us" slipped in casually. Natalie started making comments about how I deserved my own space and how independence would be good for me. They hosted dinner parties with Kenneth's colleagues where I felt distinctly unwelcome, like a houseguest who had overstayed. I began to feel like a stranger in the home I had maintained for over a decade. The home where I had nursed Natalie through the flu, where I had taught her to drive in our snowy driveway, where I had held her through breakups and celebrated her accomplishments. The home that contained every memory of our life together and every echo of our parents. 6 months after discovering the legal document, I was offered a rare opportunity, a week-long training program in Chicago that could lead to a management position at a new restaurant opening in our town. It would mean better pay, regular hours, and benefits, something I'd never had in my patchwork of jobs. I hesitated to leave Natalie and Kenneth alone in the house, but my suspicions had faded with time as nothing further had happened. "You should definitely go," Natalie encouraged with unexpected enthusiasm. "You deserve this opportunity." Throughout my trip, Natalie texted frequently with unusual questions. "What time exactly does your flight land on Saturday? Will you be taking a taxi straight home? Are you sure you're not coming back Friday instead?" I attributed her questions to sisterly concern, though a nagging feeling persisted. On Friday morning, I received an email that the final day of training had been canceled due to the instructor's illness. With a chance to return home early, I decided to surprise Natalie. I didn't call ahead, imagining her pleased reaction to having an extra evening together. Maybe we could order pizza and watch a movie like we used to. The taxi dropped me off around 4 p.m., and I was wheeling my suitcase up the driveway when I noticed an unfamiliar van parked out front with Boston Security Solutions printed on the side. As I approached the porch, I saw two men in uniforms working on our front door. One was removing our old brass doorknob while the other held what looked like a new electronic lock system. "Excuse me," I called out. "What's going on here?" "Home security upgrade, ma'am," one replied without looking up. But I didn't order. I stopped mid-sentence as the front door opened and Natalie appeared, her expression changing from direction to shock when she saw me. "Rebecca, you're supposed to be in Chicago until tomorrow." The last day was canceled. "What's happening here, Natalie?" Before she could answer, Kenneth appeared behind her, placing his hand on her shoulder in that now familiar controlling gesture. "You're early," he said flatly. "Why are you changing the locks?" I asked, a cold dread spreading through my chest. Natalie straightened her posture, and I recognized her courtroom stance, feet planted firmly, shoulders back, chin slightly raised. "Rebecca, we need to talk. Kenneth and I have made some decisions about the house." "What decisions?" I asked, though I already knew. The pieces were falling into place. Their questions about my exact return time, the strange tension of the past months, the document I'd found. "I've consulted with several attorneys," Natalie continued, her voice detached and professional. "The house legally belongs to me. It always has." "That's not true," I protested, rain beginning to fall around us, fat drops that quickly intensified. "Mom and Dad left it to both of us." "Actually, they didn't," Kenneth interjected, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "The deed transferred solely to Natalie upon your parents' death. As the legal owner, she's exercising her right to determine who lives here." "Show me these documents," I demanded, rain now soaking through my light jacket. Natalie disappeared inside and returned with a folder, handing me several papers. I squinted at them through the rain, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. One document appeared to be our parents' will, but something looked wrong. I remembered seeing the will years ago, after the funeral. This version seemed altered. "This isn't right," I said, looking up at my sister's impassive face. "This isn't the original will." "It's the official filed version," Natalie replied coldly. "I'm sorry, Rebecca, but you need to find somewhere else to live. We've been more than generous allowing you to stay rent-free all these years." "Rent-free?" I echoed in disbelief. "I paid the mortgage. I covered the property taxes. I maintained this house while you were at college." "Without any legal obligation to do so," Kenneth added. "Consider it your rent for the time you've lived here." I stood there, rain plastering my hair to my face, unable to comprehend how the sister I had sacrificed everything for could do this to me. "My things," I began. "We'll arrange for you to collect essential items at a scheduled time," Natalie interrupted. "With supervision, of course." "Supervision? I've lived here my entire life." "And now you don't," Kenneth said bluntly. "Your suitcase from your trip should tide you over until arrangements can be made." I became aware of our neighbors watching from their windows and porches. The Hendersons, who had brought casseroles after our parents died. Mr. Finley, who had taught me how to fix the furnace when it broke during Natalie's senior year of high school. All witnessing my humiliation, my sister's betrayal. "Natalie, please," I said, my voice breaking. "This is our home. Our parents' home." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, doubt, regret, pain, but Kenneth's hand tightened on her shoulder and her expression hardened again. "Not anymore," she said. "Goodbye, Rebecca." The door closed. The locksmiths continued their work, avoiding my eyes. I stood in the pouring rain, my childhood home now barred to me, the sister I raised now a stranger. With nowhere else to go, I called my friend Lauren from the diner. She lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, but immediately offered her couch. I arrived at her door soaking wet, still in shock. "Rebecca, what happened?" she asked, wrapping a towel around my shoulders. I couldn't even form the words. "How do you explain that the person you sacrificed your future for has thrown you away?" 3 days later, while staying at Lauren's apartment and sleeping on her uncomfortable couch, I received an envelope from Cartwright, Sullivan and Hayes, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms. Inside was a formal eviction notice, claiming I was a tenant at will who had failed to pay proper rent, and demanding I stay away from the property except for one supervised visit to collect personal belongings. But the most devastating discovery came when I examined the attached documents more carefully. Among them was a paper I vaguely remembered signing years ago, right after our parents' death, when I was overwhelmed with funeral arrangements and becoming Natalie's guardian. She had told me it was routine insurance paperwork that needed my signature. In reality, it was a document relinquishing any claim to our parents' estate, including the house. I sank to the floor of Lauren's tiny bathroom, the only place I could find privacy, and finally allowed myself to break down completely. My body shook with sobs as I thought of everything I had given up for Natalie, my education, my career opportunities, my youth. I had worked multiple jobs with bleeding hands and aching feet to keep a roof over our heads, to put food on the table, to give her the chance to succeed. And now I was homeless, betrayed by the very person I had sacrificed everything for. The first week after being locked out of my home passed in a fog of grief and disbelief. I continued going to work at the diner, mechanically serving plates and refilling coffee cups while my mind replayed Natalie's cold expression as she closed the door on me. Customers who knew me noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I admit that my own sister had thrown me onto the street? Lauren was endlessly supportive, insisting I stay with her as long as needed, but her apartment was tiny. I slept on her lumpy couch, my feet hanging off the end, and kept my meager possessions in my suitcase. I felt like a burden, an intruder in her space, despite her protests to the contrary. On the 8th day of my exile, I broke down during my shift when a family came in. A mother and 2 daughters who reminded me of my parents and Natalie and me in happier times. I fled to the bathroom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the faucet to splash cold water on my face. "This can't go on, Rebecca," Lauren said that evening, finding me staring blankly at the wall. "You need to fight back."
How?
I asked, my voice hollow. "She's a lawyer. She has connections, money. I'm a waitress with a high school diploma." "My cousin Ethan is a property attorney," Lauren replied, already reaching for her phone. "Not one of those fancy Boston types, but he knows his stuff. Let me call him." 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Ethan Hayes in his modest office above a hardware store in the next town over. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a reassuring manner that put me at ease despite my anxiety. "Tell me everything," he said, pushing a box of tissues toward me. "Don't leave anything out." For nearly 2 hours, I poured out the whole story: our parents' death, my sacrifice of college and career to raise Natalie, the years of financial struggle, Kenneth's appearance and influence, and finally, the betrayal. Ethan took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Did you bring the documents they served you with?" he asked when I finished. I handed over the folder containing the eviction notice, the altered will, and the paper I had unwittingly signed years ago. Ethan examined each carefully, his brow furrowing. "Rebecca," he said finally, looking up, "I know this is hard, but I need to ask, do you want to fight your sister over this?" I hesitated. Despite everything, Natalie was my only family. The thought of a legal battle against her made my stomach churn. "I don't want to hurt her," I admitted. "But that house is as much mine as it is hers. I put my whole life into it, into us. It's all I have left of our parents." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we have work to do. This situation isn't as clear-cut in their favor as they want you to believe." Over the next week, Ethan and I built my case. He explained that despite the paper I had signed, which was indeed problematic, I had several strong legal arguments on my side. You've established years of mortgage payments, property tax contributions, and home maintenance, he explained, spreading receipts and bank statements across his desk. This creates what's called a constructive trust in some jurisdictions. Essentially, your actions and financial contributions demonstrate an ownership interest regardless of whose name is on the deed. He also pointed out that my sacrifice of education and career to raise Natalie could constitute a form of contract. You gave up your scholarship and future earnings based on the understanding that you were preserving your shared family home, he said. That's consideration in legal terms. Your sister benefited enormously from your sacrifice. I felt a flutter of hope for the first time since being locked out. So I have a case? You do, Ethan confirmed. But we need more evidence. Witnesses who can testify to your role in raising Natalie, your understanding about the house, and any statements Natalie may have made over the years acknowledging your shared ownership. This sent me on a mission, contacting neighbors, family friends, and even Natalie's former teachers who had witnessed my role as her caretaker. Many were shocked by what had happened and eager to help. Mrs. Donovan, Natalie's high school English teacher, recalled a college application essay Natalie had written about how I had sacrificed everything to keep our family together in our beloved home. Mr. Finley, our elderly neighbor, not only agreed to testify, but also reminded me of something I had completely forgotten. What about your parents' safe deposit box? He asked during our conversation. Harold mentioned it to me once, said that's where they kept all their important documents. The memory hit me like a thunderbolt. Dad had indeed maintained a safe deposit box at Brookfield Community Bank. In the chaos following their deaths, with funeral arrangements and becoming Natalie's guardian, I had completely forgotten about it. The next morning, I presented myself at the bank, heart pounding. After verifying my identity and confirming I was listed as an authorized user, the bank manager escorted me to the vault. The small metal box contained exactly what we needed: the original, unaltered copies of my parents' will, which clearly stated that the house was to be shared equally between Natalie and me. This changes everything, Ethan said when I showed him the documents. The will they presented must have been altered. That's fraud, Rebecca. With this evidence, Ethan helped me file a countersuit against Natalie, claiming fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and emotional distress. We also filed for an emergency injunction to prevent her from selling or further modifying the property while our case proceeded. But perhaps the most surprising discovery came when Ethan hired a financial investigator to look into Kenneth's background. Far from the wealthy, successful businessman he portrayed himself to be, Kenneth was deeply in debt. He had been sued twice by former business partners, had a history of failed ventures, and was currently facing a tax audit. I think I understand the urgency now, Ethan said grimly. Based on these findings, Kenneth likely pushed Natalie to secure sole ownership of the house so they could sell it or take out a substantial equity loan to solve his financial problems. The pieces were falling into place. Kenneth had targeted Natalie, seeing not just an attractive, intelligent woman but also a potential path to property and financial security. He had methodically isolated her from me, the one person who might have seen through his facade, and manipulated her insecurities to turn her against me. As our legal preparations continued, I experienced a profound shift in my emotions. The initial shock and hurt began to transform into determination and righteous anger. This was not just about a house, it was about justice, about not allowing Kenneth to steal my sacrifice along with my home. If you've ever had that moment when grief turns to resolve, when you finally decide that enough is enough, you know exactly what I felt. It's like finding solid ground after drowning. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've experienced something similar, that turning point when you decided to fight back against injustice, especially from family. Sometimes the hardest battles are against the people we love the most. 2 months into our legal battle, with motions filed and preliminary hearings scheduled, I decided to look through the remaining contents of my parents' safe deposit box more thoroughly. Beyond the will, There were insurance policies, birth certificates, and several sealed envelopes I hadn't opened during my first visit. One Saturday afternoon in Lauren's apartment, I spread the contents across her coffee table and began methodically examining each document. Most were what I expected. Financial records, warranty deeds, my mother's modest jewelry inventory for insurance purposes. But then I came across a sealed envelope marked Natalie, private, in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it, conflicted. It was addressed to Natalie, not me. But we were in the middle of a legal battle, and anything relevant to our family history could be important. After several minutes of internal debate, I carefully opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Not the one I was familiar with, but an original one from a county in upstate New York, not Massachusetts. The parents listed weren't our parents. And there was a formal adoption decree, finalizing the adoption of baby girl Bennett by Harold and Eleanor Collins, our parents. My hands trembled as the realization hit me. Natalie was adopted. This was a secret our parents had kept from both of us. I had no idea, and I suspected strongly that Natalie didn't know either. Included was a letter from my mother, dated shortly before their fatal accident, addressed to Natalie on her 18th birthday. It was sealed separately with a note on the envelope, to be given to Natalie when she turns 18 or earlier if circumstances require. I didn't open this more personal letter. Whatever words my mother had written to explain this revelation to Natalie were for her eyes only. But the implication was clear. Our parents had intended to tell her about her adoption when she became an adult. Their unexpected death had prevented this truth from coming to light. I immediately called my parents' oldest friend, my Aunt Martha, not a biological aunt, but my mother's best friend since childhood who had always been aunt to us. I drove to her home that evening, documents in hand. Martha's face fell as soon as she saw what I had discovered. I wondered if this would ever come up, she said softly, inviting me in. Over tea at her kitchen table, Martha confirmed what the documents revealed. My parents had struggled with infertility for years before having me. After I was born, they tried for a second child but couldn't conceive again. When I was 8, they adopted Natalie as a newborn. They loved her instantly and completely, Martha assured me. There was never any difference in how they felt about either of you. They were planning to tell her after she graduated high school, thought she'd be mature enough then to understand. Why didn't you tell us after they died? I asked, not accusingly, just confused. Martha sighed heavily. I thought about it many times. But you were both so devastated, and you were taking on so much responsibility, Rebecca. I didn't want to add another emotional burden. As time passed, it never seemed like the right moment.
I'm sorry.
As I drove back to Lauren's apartment, memories flooded back. Strange comments from relatives that had confused me at the time but now made perfect sense. Great Aunt Judith remarking on how Natalie didn't have the Collins nose. Uncle Robert's drunken comment at a family reunion about Natalie being chosen specially. The absence of Natalie's birth story in our family lore when mine was recounted in detail. I now faced an agonizing dilemma. Should I use this information in our legal case? Would revealing this secret help me regain my home? And more importantly, was it right to use such a personal, potentially devastating revelation as a legal weapon against my sister? I brought the adoption documents to Ethan the next day, explaining my concerns. Legally, this doesn't change much, he said after reviewing them. Adoption creates the same inheritance rights as biological children. But psychologically, he trailed off, understanding the implications. I can't use this to hurt her, I decided. Whatever she's done, however Kenneth has manipulated her, I won't use this to wound her. Ethan nodded respectfully. We have strong enough evidence without it. But Rebecca, there's something else to consider. If I found these documents during standard discovery processes, Kenneth's lawyers might have as well. This possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it sent a chill down my spine. What if Kenneth already knew? What if he was using this knowledge to further manipulate Natalie? The answer came a week later, during a scheduled deposition. Kenneth was being questioned about his financial interest in the property when he made a snide remark. It's not like she's even a real Collins. The house should go to actual family. The room went silent. His lawyer looked mortified, immediately calling for a break. But the damage was done. Kenneth knew about the adoption and had clearly been using it against Natalie. After the deposition, Ethan and I pieced together what must have happened. During their preparation to claim the house, Kenneth or his attorneys had likely discovered the adoption records. Instead of sharing this information compassionately with Natalie, Kenneth had weaponized it, using it to deepen her insecurity about her place in the family and fuel her desperate grab for the house as proof of belonging. This revelation cast Natalie's actions in a new light. While it didn't excuse her betrayal, it helped explain it. She wasn't just a villain in this story. She was also a victim of Kenneth's manipulation, her identity thrown into crisis by a truth revealed in the worst possible way by someone exploiting her vulnerability. Through further investigation, we discovered that Natalie had been seeing a therapist specializing in adoption issues for the past 6 months, right around the time they must have discovered the records. She had been struggling with this knowledge in silence, guided by Kenneth's twisted narrative that I, as the biological child, had more right to our parents' love and home than she did. As our court date approached, I knew I needed to speak with Natalie alone, away from Kenneth's influence. I needed her to know that I was aware of the adoption, but that it changed nothing about our sisterhood in my eyes. That our parents had loved her completely. That the house was meant for both of us, regardless of biology. I thought of all the moments we had shared in that house, teaching her to bake cookies in our kitchen, helping her get ready for prom in the upstairs bathroom, comforting her through her first heartbreak in the living room. Our bond had been forged through shared experiences, love, and sacrifice, not blood.
She needed to know that.
But reaching Natalie proved nearly impossible. Kenneth had effectively isolated her, screening her calls and accompanying her everywhere. My attempts to contact her directly were met with cease and desist letters from their attorneys. Finally, I decided on a different approach. I would meet her in a place Kenneth wouldn't expect, a place tied to our shared history rather than legal battles. Growing up, whenever Natalie and I needed to have a serious conversation or celebrate a special moment, we would go to Millie's Diner on the edge of town. It was where we'd gone the day after our parents' funeral, where we'd celebrated her college acceptance, where I'd treated her to breakfast before her first day of law school. It was our place.
I sent a simple text, Mies.
Tuesday, 3 p.m. Remember Mom's apple pie? Please come alone. Just talk, no lawyers. I wasn't sure she would come. For all I knew, Kenneth monitored her phone. But Tuesday at 2:55 p.m., I sat in our usual booth by the window, nervously shredding a napkin, hoping against hope. At exactly 3 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled, and Natalie walked in. My heart clenched at the sight of her. She looked thinner than when I'd last seen her, with dark circles under her eyes visible even beneath careful makeup. She was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, but her posture was rigid with tension. Her eyes scanned the diner until they found me. For a moment, she hesitated, and I feared she might turn and leave. But then she walked over and slid into the booth across from me. "You came," I said softly. "I told Kenneth I had a client meeting," she replied, her voice clipped and professional. "I have 30 minutes. Old Millie herself shuffled over, her face lighting up at seeing us together. "The Collins girls. It's been too long since I've seen you both here. The usual?" Before Natalie could object, I nodded. "Yes, please. 2 slices of apple pie and coffee." After Millie moved away, an uncomfortable silence fell between us. Natalie wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her perfectly manicured nails. "How are you?" I finally asked. "Let's not pretend this is a social call, Rebecca," she replied coldly. "What do you want? Our attorneys should be handling all communication. I'm not here as your legal opponent. I'm here as your sister," I said gently. "And I think we need to talk about what Kenneth found in the adoption records." Natalie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "You know? I found the original documents in Mom and Dad's safe deposit box. There was a letter from Mom to you for when you turned 18. I didn't read it, it's sealed. It's yours." I reached into my purse and slid the envelope across the table. Natalie stared at it, her hand trembling slightly as she picked it up. Kenneth told me you'd always known. That everyone had kept it from just me. My heart broke at the pain in her voice. That's not true. I had no idea until a few weeks ago. Mom and Dad were planning to tell you after high school graduation, but then the accident. So it's true? I'm not really a Collins. Her voice was barely audible. You are absolutely a Collins, I said firmly. Mom and Dad chose you. They wanted you specifically. They loved you completely. Being adopted doesn't change who you are or your place in our family. Millie returned with our pie and coffee, beaming at us. Just like old times, she said before bustling away. The familiar sight of apple pie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting on top, our comfort food through countless childhood conversations, seemed to crack something in Natalie's carefully maintained facade. Kenneth said. She began, then stopped, swallowing hard. He said you resented raising me. That you only did it because you had to, not because you wanted to. That you blamed me for ruining your life. Oh, Natalie, I whispered, fighting back tears. That couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, it was hard sometimes. Yes, there were moments I wish things could have been different for both of us. But I never, ever regretted choosing to be there for you. Not for a single day. But you gave up everything, college, your career, your future. I gave up some opportunities, I corrected her, and gained others. I got to see you grow up. I got to be there for your first date, your high school graduation, your college acceptance. Those moments meant everything to me. Tears welled in Natalie's eyes. Kenneth convinced me that you'd never really loved me as a sister. That you'd feel relieved if I took the burden of sharing the house off your hands. She laughed bitterly. He said I was doing you a favor by forcing you to move on with your life. And you believed him? I asked, not accusingly, just trying to understand. He can be very convincing, she admitted, looking down. And I was vulnerable after finding out about the adoption. It made me question everything. Who I was. Where I belonged. You belong with me, I said simply. You're my sister, blood or not. Natalie's composure finally crumbled. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she confessed the full extent of Kenneth's manipulation. He found the adoption records 6 months ago. He told me we shouldn't tell you that we knew that you might use it against me legally. She wiped her eyes. Then he started planting doubts, pointing out how you and Mom had the same eyes, how you and Dad had the same laugh. Things I'd never even thought about before. As she spoke, the full picture emerged. Kenneth had methodically isolated Natalie, first from me, then from our old friends and neighbors. He'd interpreted every action and memory through a distorted lens, recasting my sacrifices as obligations and my love as duty. He'd convinced her that securing sole ownership of the house was the only way to cement her place in the Collins family. He's planning to sell it, she admitted, her voice breaking. As soon as the court case is resolved. He says we need the capital for his new business venture. Sell our home. I was stunned despite everything. The house we grew up in? Where all our memories of Mom and Dad are. Natalie nodded miserably. He's already talking to realtors. I tried to object, but he says I'm being sentimental and impractical. I reached across the table and took her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. Natalie, there's something else you need to know. Kenneth isn't who he pretends to be. Our attorney investigated his finances. He's deeply in debt. He has failed businesses and lawsuits against him. She didn't look as surprised as I'd expected. I've suspected something was wrong, she admitted. There have been strange calls, letters he hides from me. He's been increasingly desperate about getting full control of the house. She hesitated, then added in a whisper. And he has gambling debts. I found receipts from casinos, loans from people I've never heard of. Is that why you've lost so much weight? Why you look so exhausted? I asked gently. Natalie's eyes filled with tears again. He gets angry when things don't go his way. He doesn't hit me, she quickly added, seeing my expression. But the yelling, the cold silences, the subtle threats about my career, my future. That's still abuse, Nat, I said, using her childhood nickname for the first time in years. She nodded slowly, as if finally accepting this truth. I don't know how to get out, she whispered. He knows everything about me, all my weaknesses. And now he has legal control over our house. I squeezed her hand. Not necessarily. I took out copies of the original will and my financial records. Look at these. Mom and Dad left the house to both of us equally. And I've been making mortgage payments and covering taxes for years. We have a strong case, Natalie. She examined the documents, her lawyer's mind clearly processing the implications. These would invalidate everything Kenneth's been building, she said slowly. We don't have to be enemies in this, I told her. We could present a united front, get the house back in both our names, as our parents intended. Hope flickered in her eyes, but fear quickly followed. Kenneth will be furious. You don't have to face him alone, I promised. We'll do it together, like we've done everything else. For the first time, Natalie gave me a genuine smile. Small and tremulous, but real. I've missed you, Becca. I've missed you too, Nat. We spent the next 20 minutes formulating a plan. Natalie would gather evidence of Kenneth's financial deception and emotional abuse. We would meet with Ethan together to consolidate our legal strategy. And most immediately, we would return to the house to confront Kenneth with the truth. Are you sure about going back today? I asked as we left the diner. We could wait, prepare more. No, Natalie said with newfound determination. I need to do this now before I lose my courage. And I want you with me when I tell him it's over. We drove separately to the house, our house. As we walked up the driveway together, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and homecoming. This place had been my anchor through everything, and now I was fighting to reclaim it alongside the sister I'd feared I'd lost forever. Kenneth's car was in the driveway. Natalie used her key to open the door, and I followed her inside, my heart pounding at being back in these familiar rooms after months of exile. Natalie? Is that you? Kenneth's voice came from the study, our father's old study, which he had claimed as his own. Yes, she called back. And Rebecca is with me. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Kenneth appeared in the doorway, his expression cycling rapidly from confusion to shock to calculated anger. What is she doing here? He demanded. She's violating the restraining order. There is no valid restraining order, Kenneth, Natalie replied, her voice steadier than I'd expected. And this is her home, too. Kenneth's face darkened as he registered our united front. I see. Had a little sisterly chat, did you? Bonding over being orphans. His voice dripped with contempt. Careful, Natalie. Only one of you is a real Collins. That's where you're wrong, I interjected. Family isn't about blood. It's about love and commitment. Something you wouldn't understand. How touching, he sneered. But legally meaningless. This house belongs to my wife, and you're trespassing. Actually, Natalie said, stepping forward, I've reviewed all the documentation. The original will left the house to both of us equally. And Rebecca has equity through years of mortgage payments and property tax contributions. Kenneth's smirk faltered slightly. Your signature says otherwise. The documents are filed and finalized. Documents that may have been obtained through fraud and misrepresentation, Natalie countered, her legal training evident in her precise language, which would make them voidable under state law. Kenneth's calculated facade began to crack. You're choosing her over me? Your husband? For what? A rundown house and some sentimental garbage about sisterhood. I'm choosing truth over lies, Natalie replied steadily. I'm choosing the sister who sacrificed everything for me over the husband who manipulated and isolated me. You ungrateful bitch, Kenneth snarled, his charming mask completely gone now. After everything I've done for you? I made you who you are. No, I said firmly. She made herself who she is, with the foundation our parents gave her and the support I tried to provide. You just try to take credit for it. Kenneth's face contorted with rage. He took a threatening step toward Natalie. You're nothing without me. You think your fancy law firm will keep you once I tell them what an emotional wreck you are? How you've been seeing a therapist because you can't handle knowing you're just some unwanted baby your parents picked up. I moved protectively toward my sister, but Natalie stood her ground. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Kenneth, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. And I want you out of our house. Today. You can't do this to me, he shouted, desperation now mingling with his anger. I have plans for this property. I have commitments. Gambling debts, you mean? Natalie asked quietly. Loans from people I don't want to know? I found everything, Kenneth. The hidden bank statements, the threatening letters, the second phone. It's over. For a moment, I thought Kenneth might become violent. His hands clenched into fists, and his entire body trembled with rage. But then, perhaps remembering that there were two of us and that the neighbors might hear, he forced a cold laugh.
Fine.
Have your pathetic sisterly reunion. But this isn't over. I'll be contacting my attorneys immediately. I already contacted mine, Natalie replied. They'll be serving you with divorce papers tomorrow. And a restraining order, a real one. Kenneth glared at both of us, then stormed upstairs. We could hear him throwing things into suitcases, cursing loudly. Natalie and I remained in the living room, side by side, neither of us speaking but drawing strength from each other's presence. 20 minutes later, Kenneth came downstairs with 2 suitcases. He paused at the door for one final, venomous comment. You'll regret this, Natalie. Both of you will. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that seemed to release the tension that had been holding us rigid. Natalie turned to me, and without a word, we fell into each other's arms, both of us crying, for what we had lost, for what we had found again, and for the long road of healing that lay ahead. 1 year later, a little to the left, I called out, gesturing with my paint-splattered hands. That's perfect. Natalie adjusted the framed photo on the freshly painted wall of our living room, a picture of the 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Natalie, and me, taken during our last family vacation to Cape Cod. Below it hung a smaller frame containing a faded crayon drawing Natalie had made in elementary school, labeled My Family in wobbly letters. What do you think? She asked, stepping back to admire our work. I think Mom and Dad would love what we've done with the place. I replied honestly. In the year since Kenneth's departure, we had transformed our family home. Gone was the cold, modernist furniture he had insisted upon, replaced with warm, comfortable pieces that reflected our shared taste. We had painted the walls together, refinished the hardwood floors ourselves, and planted a garden of our mother's favorite flowers in the backyard. More importantly, we had rebuilt our relationship, stronger than before. The legal battle with Kenneth had been difficult and draining, but ultimately successful. With the evidence Natalie provided about his financial deceptions and the original will from the safe deposit box, we were able to invalidate the fraudulent documents and restore joint ownership of the house to both of us. Kenneth hadn't gone quietly. He had fought viciously through his attorneys, even attempting to claim part of the house in the divorce settlement. But his position crumbled when his gambling debts came to light during discovery, along with evidence that he had misappropriated funds from his law firm's clients. He eventually agreed to a settlement that left him no claim to our home, in exchange for Natalie not pursuing criminal charges for the financial improprieties she had discovered. Last we heard, he had moved to Nevada to escape his creditors, leaving a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts behind him. Natalie's divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. The process had been painful but liberating for her. She had taken a leave of absence from her high-pressure law firm, using the time to recover and reassess her priorities. When she returned to work, it was at a nonprofit legal aid center specializing in adoption rights and family law, where she now helped other adoptees navigate the complex emotions and legal questions surrounding their identities. I never thought I'd say this, she admitted one evening as we shared dinner at our restored kitchen table, but I'm actually grateful the truth about my adoption came out. Not the way it happened, she clarified, but knowing who I am has made me feel more complete, not less. She had read our mother's letter countless times, a beautiful, loving explanation of how desperately our parents had wanted her, how they had chosen her specifically, how they had planned to tell her when she was mature enough to understand that being adopted made her more precious, not less, because she had been so explicitly wanted and chosen. With my encouragement, Natalie had even decided to search for her birth mother. It had been a long process with many emotional ups and downs, but 3 months ago, they had finally met, a tearful, healing reunion that answered many of Natalie's questions about her origins. Her birth mother, Angela, had been a 17-year-old girl unable to care for a baby, but desperate to ensure her child found a loving home. Learning that Natalie had indeed grown up loved and now had a successful career and strong relationship with her adoptive sister had brought Angela profound peace. As for me, I had finally returned to college, taking evening classes at the local community college with the goal of eventually completing my business degree. The scholarship was long gone, but Natalie had insisted on helping with tuition costs. "It's the least I can do after everything you sacrificed for me," she had said when I initially refused. "It's not about keeping score," I'd told her. "That's what Kenneth tried to make us do, turn our relationship into transactions and debts." "I know," she'd agreed, "but I want to do this. Not from guilt, but from love. The way you supported me all those years." So I had accepted, and now at 33, I was finally pursuing the education I had abandoned at 19. It felt strange to be older than most of my classmates, but also empowering. I brought life experience and determination they couldn't match. I had even started dating again cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Jason, a kind-hearted science teacher I met in my biology class, had been patient with my trust issues and respectful of my close relationship with Natalie. Tonight, he would be joining us for the housewarming party we were throwing to celebrate the completion of our renovations. "Do you think we have enough food?" Natalie asked, surveying the spread we had prepared together. "Definitely," I assured her, adjusting the platter of homemade appetizers. "Between your gourmet cooking skills and my baking, no one's going home hungry." The doorbell rang, and I felt a surge of joy at the sound. For so long, this house had been a battleground, a source of pain and conflict. Now it was once again a home, filled with warmth and welcome. Our guests began to arrive: Lauren, whose couch had sheltered me in my darkest days; Ethan, whose legal expertise had helped us reclaim our inheritance; Mr. Finley from next door, who had testified about my years of maintaining the property; Mrs. Donovan, Natalie's former teacher, and even Aunt Martha, who had flown in from Arizona for the occasion. As I watched Natalie happily greeting everyone, her face animated and healthy, I felt a profound sense of peace. The sister I had raised, nearly lost, and found again was truly home, not just in this house, but in herself. Later in the evening, as our guests mingled in the living room, Natalie pulled me aside into the quiet of the kitchen. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a framed document, the formal legal agreement we had signed establishing our joint ownership of the house, with an inscription Natalie had added at the bottom. "Home is where your sister is." "I thought we could hang it next to this," she said, pulling out one more frame from behind her back. It was the original eviction notice from Kenneth's lawyers, now mounted ironically behind glass with a second inscription: "Some bonds can't be broken by legal documents." I laughed through sudden tears. Perfect. A reminder of what we overcame. "And who we are," Natalie added softly. "Sisters by choice, not just circumstance." As we rejoined our guests, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed us had ultimately strengthened our bond. The secret that could have divided us had instead deepened our understanding of family. The loss that had once defined us had given way to new beginnings. Family, I had learned, was not defined by blood or legal documents, but by the choices we make every day to love, to forgive, to stand by each other through the hardest times. Natalie and I had chosen to be sisters in the truest sense of the word, and that choice was stronger than any force that had tried to tear us apart. Looking around at the home we had reclaimed and the life we were rebuilding, I knew that our parents would be proud of the family we had preserved, against all odds. This journey has taught me that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who stands by you when the world turns cold. If you've experienced family betrayal or reconciliation in your own life, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Has karma or justice ever come full circle for you? Please share your experiences and hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more true family stories that remind us all that even in our darkest moments, healing is possible. Thank you for witnessing our journey from betrayal to forgiveness. Sometimes the family we fight hardest to keep is the one most worth saving.